"My husband broke that old man's arm," my daughter said when I showed up to Christmas dinner with my arm in a cast. My son-in-law smirked proudly. "Now, the old man knows who's in charge." I just smiled. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and what he saw made him panic. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The cast on my right arm felt heavier than it should have as I stood outside Milena's front door that Christmas evening. 67 years old, and here I was, about to endure another holiday dinner where I'd be treated like a burden rather than the father who'd raised her alone after her mother died. I rang the doorbell with my good hand, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation filtering through the expensive wooden door. Louis had insisted they buy this house in the affluent neighborhood, though I knew they could barely afford the mortgage payments. Pride, I'd learned, was expensive. "Dad's here," I heard Milena call out, though her tone suggested she was announcing an interruption rather than welcoming her father. The door swung open, and there stood my daughter. At 34, Milena had inherited her mother's sharp features, but none of her warmth. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe style Louis preferred, and her smile felt as artificial as the Christmas decorations scattered around their living room. "Hi, Dad," she said, her eyes immediately focusing on my cast. "Come in, I guess." The house smelled like expensive candles and roasted turkey, but underneath it all, I detected something else. Tension. The kind that had become a permanent resident in my daughter's life since she married Louis 5 years ago. Louis appeared behind her, all 6 feet 2 inches of manufactured charm. His smile was wide, his handshake firm with my good hand, but his eyes held that familiar glint of superiority that made my stomach turn. "Tobias," he said, drawing out my name like it was a joke only he understood. "Good to see you, old man. How's the arm treating you?" "It's healing," I replied simply, not offering more details. They wouldn't care anyway. We moved to the dining room where the table was set for 3, just 3. No consideration for guests, no acknowledgement that Christmas used to mean something more in our family. I took my designated seat, the one closest to the kitchen, where I'd be out of the way. As Milena served the food, she glanced at my cast again and let out a small laugh. "My husband broke that old man's arm," she said to Louis, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "Said the guy was being pushy about something." The words hit me like ice water. She was talking about me, about my injury, about how I'd gotten hurt. Louis's chest puffed out with pride. "Now the old man knows who's in charge," he said, cutting into his turkey with unnecessary force. Sometimes people need to learn their place. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my expression neutral. They had no idea what had really happened 3 days ago when Louis had grabbed my arm and twisted it until I heard the bone snap. They had no idea about a lot of things. "Dad was probably being difficult again," Milena continued, passing the potatoes without looking at me. "You know how he gets, thinking he still has a say in everything." I took a sip of water, my throat suddenly dry. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd sung to sleep every night after Sarah died, the child I'd worked 3 jobs to support, putting her through college, walking her down the aisle. This was how she spoke about me now. Louis leaned back in his chair, studying me with those cold gray eyes. "Your father needs to understand that things have changed. He's not running the show anymore. Age catches up to everyone." I set down my fork carefully. "Is that so?" "That's so," Louis said, his voice taking on that edge I'd heard too many times before. "You had your time, Tobias. Now it's time to step back and let the younger generation take over." Milena nodded along like a puppet on strings. "Louis is right, Dad. You can't keep pretending you're still relevant. Your opinions don't carry the weight they used to." The irony was almost laughable. If only they knew what I'd been doing for the past 2 years while they'd been treating me like a senile old fool. If only they understood what was coming. I smiled then, a real smile for the first time all evening. "You might be surprised by how relevant I still am." Louis's expression darkened. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the dining room like a blade. Louis froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Milena looked confused, glancing between her husband and the front door. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked Louis, but his face had gone pale. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent. I took another sip of my water, that smile still playing on my lips. "I think you should answer that." Lewis's hand was shaking slightly as he set down his fork. His eyes darted to the window, then back to me, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Fear. "Who could that be on Christmas?" Milena asked, starting to rise from her chair. "Sit down," Lewis snapped, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "Just sit down for a minute." But the doorbell rang a third time, and now there was knocking too. Patient but firm knocking that suggested whoever was outside wasn't going away. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. "I think our evening is about to become much more interesting." Lewis stared at me across the table, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked like exactly what he was. A small man who had built his confidence on bullying someone he thought was weaker than him. The knocking came again, and this time a voice called out, "We're looking for Mr. Tobias Morrison." Lewis's face went completely white. The silence that followed the voice calling my name was deafening. Lewis sat frozen in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped his dinner knife. Milena looked between us, confusion written across her face. "Dad," she whispered. "Who's that?" I stood slowly, favoring my injured arm. "Why don't we find out?" Lewis shot to his feet. "Don't answer it." The command in his voice made Milena flinch again, but it only made me smile wider. "Now why would I ignore visitors on Christmas, Lewis? That would be rude." I made my way to the front door, hearing their whispered argument behind me. Lewis was hissing something about staying quiet, pretending we weren't home, but Milena was asking questions he clearly didn't want to answer. Through the peephole, I saw exactly what I'd expected to see. Two men in expensive suits, both carrying briefcases, both looking like they belonged in corporate boardrooms rather than suburban doorsteps. I opened the door with my good arm. "Mr. Morrison," the taller man said, extending his hand. "I'm James Mitchell from Mitchell, Rodriguez and Associates. This is my colleague, David Chen. We apologize for the intrusion on Christmas Day, but you said this matter was urgent." "It is," I replied, shaking their hands warmly. "Please come in. I believe we have some business to discuss." Behind me, I heard a chair scrape against the floor. Lewis had stood up so quickly he'd knocked his seat backward. I led the lawyers into the dining room, where my daughter and son-in-law stood like deer caught in headlights. The contrast was striking. These men treated me with the respect I'd earned over 4 decades of hard work, while my own family looked at me like I was an inconvenience. "Milena, Lewis," I said, gesturing to our visitors, "I'd like you to meet my attorneys." Lewis's face had progressed from pale to gray. "Your what?" James Mitchell opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Morrison, we have the documents you requested. The transfer papers are ready for your signature." "Transfer papers?" Milena's voice cracked. "Dad, what's going on?" I settled back into my chair, suddenly feeling more comfortable than I had in years. "I suppose it's time I shared some news with you both. You see, 2 years ago I made a decision about my future and my legacy." David Chen pulled out a thick manila folder. "Your father sold Morrison Construction Company for $12.5 million, he said matter-of-factly. "The sale was completed 18 months ago." The words hit the room like a bomb. Milena's mouth fell open. Lewis grabbed the back of his chair for support. "That's impossible," Lewis stammered. "The company was barely surviving. Tobias was running it into the ground." James Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed. Morrison Construction was one of the most profitable mid-size construction companies in the state. Mr. Morrison simply kept a low profile about his success." I watched Lewis's face as the reality began to sink in. For 5 years, he'd been treating me like a failure, a burden, an old man whose business was worthless. He'd based his entire sense of superiority on the belief that I was poor and powerless. "But Dad," Milena whispered, sinking into her chair, "you never said anything. You let us think." "I let you think what you wanted to think," I replied calmly. "I was curious to see how you'd treat me if you believed I had nothing to offer." The lawyers continued their presentation with professional detachment. David Chen spread several documents across the table. "Beyond the initial sale, Mr. Morrison has been investing wisely. He's now a silent partner in 6 different companies, owns 4 rental properties, and has a diversified portfolio worth approximately $8.2 million. Lewis's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his chair. His face was the color of ash. $8 million? The properties alone generate $43,000 in monthly income, James Mitchell added, consulting his notes. Your father has been quite strategic in his investments. I could see the calculations running through Lewis's head. All those times he'd lectured me about money, all those snide comments about my failed business, all those moments when he'd made me feel like a charity case in my own daughter's house. Why? Milena asked, and for the first time in years, I heard genuine emotion in her voice. Why didn't you tell us? I studied my daughter's face, looking for the little girl I'd once known. Because I needed to understand who you'd become, Milena. I needed to see if the values I'd tried to teach you had survived. Lewis found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. You've had millions of dollars this whole time, and you've been living in that small apartment, driving that old car. I've been living comfortably, I corrected. I chose simplicity. There's a difference between can't afford and don't need. The lawyers exchanged glances. James Mitchell cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, should we proceed with the documentation? I nodded. Yes, I think it's time. David Chen pulled out another set of papers. These documents outline the changes to your will and estate planning. As requested, all assets will be placed in trust, with very specific conditions for any potential beneficiaries. Milena leaned forward, her face pale. What kind of conditions? I looked at her steadily. The kind that ensure my legacy goes to people who've earned it through respect and love, not manipulation and cruelty. Lewis's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He was beginning to understand that everything he'd built his confidence on was crumbling beneath him. The documentation also includes, James Mitchell continued, the establishment of the Sarah Morrison Foundation for Elder Care Advocacy, which will be funded with $2 million from your estate. Peace. My wife's name hung in the air like a benediction. Milena's eyes filled with tears. Your mother would have been proud of that foundation, I said quietly. She always believed in taking care of people who couldn't take care of themselves. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Sarah would have been horrified to see how our daughter had treated me, especially after my injury. Lewis was staring at the papers spread across the table like they were written in a foreign language. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, I said, signing my name with careful strokes despite my cast. You see, Lewis, you made one critical error in judgment. He looked up at me with desperate eyes. You assumed that because I'm older, I'm weaker. You assumed that because I didn't fight back, I couldn't fight back. I set down the pen and met his gaze. You assumed wrong. The silence that followed my words was broken only by the rustle of papers as David Chen organized the documents. Lewis stared at the table, his breathing shallow, while Milena's eyes darted between me and the lawyers as if she were watching a tennis match she couldn't follow. I don't understand, she whispered. Dad, if you had all this money, why did you let Lewis? Why didn't I what, sweetheart? I asked gently. Why didn't I buy your love? Why didn't I use money to force respect? Her face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap after nightmares. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by the calculating look I'd seen too often in recent years. James Mitchell cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, there's one more document that requires your attention. He pulled out a legal-sized envelope marked confidential. The updated will. Lewis's head snapped up. Will? I took the envelope with my good hand, feeling the weight of it. 5 pages that would determine the future of everything I'd built. Yes, Lewis, my will. You've been very interested in it lately, haven't you? The color drained from his face. He'd been asking Milena about my will for months, pressuring her to find out what I'd left them. The questions had always come through her, of course. Lewis was too smart to ask me directly. I had my previous will drawn up 8 years ago, I continued, breaking the seal on the envelope. Back then, I left everything to Milena, assuming she'd use it wisely, share it fairly with any family she might have. Milena leaned forward. Had, I confirmed. This is my new will dated last month, after considerable thought and observation. David Chen spread the pages across the table like he was dealing cards. The legal language was dense, but the important parts were highlighted in yellow. The primary beneficiary of the Morrison estate, James Mitchell read aloud, including all financial assets, properties, and business interests, will be determined by the following criteria. Lewis's hands were shaking now. What criteria? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The criteria you've been helping me evaluate, Lewis. You see, for the past 2 years, I've been watching, learning, taking notes. From my jacket pocket, I pulled out a small leather notebook. It was worn from use, filled with my careful handwriting. October 15th, I read aloud. Lewis told Milena she shouldn't waste time visiting me because old people just complain. Quote, "Your dad's just lonely and wants attention." Milena's face went white. You heard that? November 3rd. Lewis suggested I should consider moving to a nursing home because I'm becoming a burden. He said it would be better for everyone, especially Milena. I flipped through more pages, each entry a small wound that had accumulated over time. December 9th. Lewis grabbed my arm when I refused to sign papers giving him power of attorney. He said I was being stubborn and selfish. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. December 22nd, 3 days ago. Lewis twisted my arm until it broke because I wouldn't agree to sell this house and move in with you. I looked up at my daughter. That's how I really got hurt, Milena. Your husband broke my arm because I said no to him. The notebook slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. That's not... Lewis wouldn't... Lewis's face was a mask of panic. She's lying, Milena. The old man is confused. He fell down his stairs, remember? He told us he fell. I told you what I thought you needed to hear to keep the peace, I said quietly. I've been keeping the peace for 2 years while you destroyed my relationship with my daughter. David Chen pulled out another document. Mr. Morrison also requested that we include this medical report. The break pattern in your arm was consistent with forced twisting, not a fall. Lewis shot to his feet. This is insane. You can't prove any of this. Actually, James Mitchell said calmly, we can, Mr. Morrison's apartment has had security cameras installed for the past 6 months. The incident on December 22nd was recorded. The lie that Lewis had built his confidence on crumbled in that instant. Milena stared at him with growing horror. You told me he fell, she whispered. He did fall, Lewis insisted, but his voice was desperate now. After he got dizzy and lost his balance, I opened the notebook to the last entry. Lewis Mitchell Harrison threatened to hurt me if I didn't give him control of my finances. He said I was too old to know what was good for me. He said Milena agreed with him. Dad, I never... Milena started, but I held up my hand. He said you agreed that I was becoming a problem, that you were tired of dealing with me, that you wished I would just go away. The words hung in the air like poison. Milena's face was a map of shock and shame. I never said that, she breathed. Lewis, tell him I never said that. But Lewis was trapped, and he knew it. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. James Mitchell returned to the will. Given the evidence of elder abuse and manipulation, Mr. Morrison has made significant changes to his estate planning. The legal language was clear and devastating. The house that Lewis and Milena were struggling to afford, the one Lewis had pressured me to help them buy, would be sold. The proceeds, along with my other assets, would go into a trust. The Morrison Family Trust, David Chen explained, will provide for Milena's basic needs, but only if certain conditions are met. What conditions? Milena asked, her voice barely audible. I folded my hands on the table. First, you must divorce Lewis within 6 months. Lewis exploded from his chair. You can't do that. You can't control her life. I'm not controlling anything, I said calmly. I'm giving her a choice. She can choose her marriage, or she can choose her inheritance, but she can't have both. That's blackmail, Lewis snarled. That's consequences, I corrected. Something you've avoided for far too long. Milena was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Dad, please. Lewis made mistakes, but he's my husband. We can work this out. The second condition, James Mitchell continued reading, is that Milena must complete 1 year of family counseling and demonstrate genuine reconciliation with her father. And the third condition, David Chen added, is that she must publicly acknowledge the abuse that occurred and take responsibility for her role in enabling it. Lewis lunged toward the table, but I was ready for him. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't flinch. "Touch me again," I said quietly, "and you'll discover just how much evidence I've been gathering." He stopped mid-motion, realizing that everyone in the room was watching, that the lawyers were witnesses to his aggression. "If Milena chooses not to meet these conditions," James Mitchell concluded, "the entire estate will go to the Sarah Morrison Foundation and various charities." The room fell silent except for Milena's quiet sobbing. Lewis collapsed back into his chair, the fight gone out of him. "You're destroying our family," Milena whispered. I looked at my daughter, with all the love and disappointment I'd been carrying for 2 years. "No, sweetheart. I'm trying to save what's left of it." The lawyers left shortly after midnight, their briefcases packed with signed documents that would change everything. The house felt different now, charged with the electricity that comes after a storm passes, but before you know how much damage has been done. Milena sat in her living room, still in her Christmas dress, staring at the coffee table, where legal papers were scattered like fallen leaves. Lewis paced behind her, his footsteps wearing a path in the expensive carpet he'd insisted they buy. $8 million, he muttered for the third time. $8 million, and he's been living like a pauper. I remained in the doorway, my cast a visible reminder of what had brought us to this moment. My daughter hadn't looked at me since the lawyers left. She was trapped between the life she'd built and the father she'd lost along the way. "Milena," I said softly, "we need to talk." Lewis spun around. "She has nothing to say to you." "I think that's her decision, don't you?" I moved to the chair across from her, the same chair where I'd sat countless times over the years, watching Lewis gradually poison my relationship with my daughter. She finally looked up, her makeup ruined by tears. "Why didn't you tell me about the money before? Why did you let us struggle?" The question cut deep, because I could hear the genuine pain behind it. "When did you start struggling, sweetheart?" "What? When did you and Lewis start struggling financially?" I repeated. "Because from where I'm sitting, you live in a $400,000 house, drive a BMW and a Mercedes, take vacations to Europe." Lewis stopped pacing. "We have expenses." "Expenses you created," I replied. "Expenses that required you to take out loans against this house. Loans that put you in debt despite your combined income of over $120,000 a year." Milena's face paled. "How do you know about the loans?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a banking app. "Because Lewis used me as a co-signer without telling me. The bank called me 6 months ago when you missed your first payment." The silence was deafening. Lewis's face went through several emotions before settling on defiance. "We needed help. You had money." "You forged my signature," I said quietly. "That's fraud, Lewis." "It's not fraud if we intended to pay it back." "With what money?" I asked. "You're already behind on your mortgage, your car payments, your credit cards. The bank told me everything when I asked for the details." Milena stared at her husband. "You told me Dad co-signed willingly." Lewis's mouth worked like a fish, gasping for air. He would have said no. "So you decided for me," I said. "Just like you decided I should give you power of attorney. Just like you decided I should sell my home and move in here so you could control my finances." The pieces were falling into place for Milena, and I could see the moment when the full picture became clear. Her husband hadn't just been disrespectful to her father. He'd been planning to rob him. "The papers you wanted me to sign last week," I continued, "weren't just for power of attorney, were they?" Lewis backed toward the kitchen. "I don't know what you're talking about." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded document. "I had my lawyer review these before I refused to sign them. You weren't just asking for power of attorney, Lewis. You were asking me to sign over the deed to my apartment, my car, and any future assets." Milena took the papers with shaking hands. As she read, her face went from pale to gray. "You were going to steal everything from him," she whispered. "It's not stealing," Lewis said desperately. "We're family. He's old. He doesn't need all that money. We have a future to think about." "Whose future?" I asked. "Because according to my research, you've been planning to divorce Milena as soon as you gained control of my assets." The accusation hit the room like a physical blow. Milena dropped the papers. "That's a lie," Lewis said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling to a saved email. "This is from a private investigator I hired 3 months ago. Would you like me to read what he found?" Lewis went completely still. "Lewis Harrison has been having an affair with Rebecca Martinez, a paralegal at his law firm, for the past 8 months," I read. "He's been telling Miss Martinez that he plans to divorce his wife as soon as he secures a large financial settlement from his elderly father-in-law." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Milena made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "He's been renting an apartment on Elm Street where he meets Miss Martinez twice a week," I continued. "The lease is in both their names, and they've been discussing marriage plans." Lewis tried to run then. He made it 2 steps toward the back door before Milena's voice stopped him cold. "Don't you dare." She stood slowly, her Christmas dress wrinkled, her face a mask of betrayal and rage. "Don't you dare walk away from this." "Milena, I can explain." "Explain what?" Her voice was rising now. "Explain how you've been cheating on me while planning to steal from my father? Explain how you broke his arm because he wouldn't let you rob him blind?" Lewis looked around the room like a trapped animal. "Your father is lying. He's trying to turn you against me." "My father has $8 million, Milena said slowly. $8 million that he earned by working his entire life, and you wanted to steal it." "It's not stealing if what?" she screamed. "If you trick me into helping you? If you manipulate me into turning against my own father?" The dam burst then. Years of suppressed guilt, of buried love for her father, of growing unease with her husband's behavior came pouring out. "You made me choose," she sobbed. "You made me choose between you and him, and I chose wrong. I chose so wrong." She turned to me then, her face streaked with mascara and tears. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I stood slowly, my heart breaking for the daughter I'd almost lost. "I know you are, sweetheart. Can you forgive me?" I looked at Lewis, who was standing frozen by the kitchen door, his empire of lies crumbling around him. Then I looked at my daughter, who was seeing her husband clearly for the first time. "Forgiveness isn't the question," I said softly. "The question is whether you're ready to choose differently." Lewis made his final play then. "Milena, if you listen to him, you'll lose everything. Think about what you're giving up." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had isolated her from her father, who had planned to use her and discard her, who had broken an old man's arm out of greed. "I already lost everything," she said quietly, "the day I let you convince me that my father didn't matter." Lewis's shoulders sagged in defeat. The game was over, and he knew it. The next morning came too soon and not soon enough. I woke in my own apartment, my arm throbbing, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. The events of Christmas night felt surreal in the pale winter light, filtering through my bedroom window. My phone had been buzzing since dawn, missed calls from Milena, text messages, voicemails. I wasn't ready to answer them yet. Some conversations needed time to breathe before they could begin. Instead, I made coffee with one hand, a skill I'd perfected over the past few days, and sat at my kitchen table with the morning newspaper. The comic seemed appropriate reading after the drama of the previous evening. At 9:30, someone knocked on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Milena standing in the hallway, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup long gone, and she looked like she hadn't slept at all. I opened the door without speaking. "He's gone," she said simply. "Lewis packed his things and left around 3 this morning." I stepped aside to let her in. She moved like someone in shock, careful and uncertain. "Did he say where he was going?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "To Rebecca's apartment, I assume. He left divorce papers on the kitchen counter, with a note saying I could keep the house if I didn't make things difficult." I poured her a cup of coffee, remembering how she liked it. 2 sugars, no cream. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. "I called the bank this morning," she continued, accepting the mug with trembling hands, "about the loans Lewis took out using your name. They said there might be criminal charges." "There will be," I confirmed. "Forgery, fraud, elder abuse. James Mitchell is handling it." She flinched at the word abuse, and I realized she was still processing the reality of what had happened. For 2 years, she'd watched her husband gradually isolate me, dismiss me, and finally hurt me, and she'd either participated or looked the other way. "I need to understand something," she said, staring into her coffee. "When did you know? When did you realize what Louis was doing?" I settled into the chair across from her, the same way we'd sit when she was little, and had something important to tell me. "I suspected for about a year. I knew for certain 6 months ago." "Why didn't you say anything?" The question hung between us, loaded with pain and regret. I chose my words carefully. "Because I needed you to see it for yourself. If I'd told you Louis was manipulating you, what would you have done?" She was quiet for a long time. "I would have defended him. And you would have cut me out of your life completely to prove your loyalty to him." I reached across the table with my good hand and touched her fingers. "I couldn't risk losing you entirely." The tears came then, the kind that comes from deep places where grief lives. "I already lost me, Dad. I don't know who I've become. I don't recognize the person who said those things about you. You became someone who was trying to survive in an impossible situation," I said gently. "Louis is very good at what he does. You weren't his first victim." Her head snapped up. "What do you mean?" I pulled out a manila folder that had been sitting on my counter since the lawyers left. "The private investigator found some interesting information about your husband's past. Inside were copies of court documents, police reports, and witness statements. Louis Harrison had been married twice before. Both marriages had ended in divorce, both times with allegations of financial manipulation and emotional abuse. His first wife," I said, pointing to a police report, "filed charges for elder abuse against her own grandfather after Louis convinced her that the old man was trying to control her life. They stole $47,000 from him before he died." Melena's face went white as she read. "The second wife?" "Similar pattern. He isolated her from her family, convinced her that her parents were toxic and controlling, then forged her father's signature on loan documents. When the father died, Louis tried to contest the will." She set the papers down with shaking hands. "He told me his ex-wives were crazy. He said they were vindictive and jealous." "That's what abusers do," I said. "They rewrite history to make themselves the victim." We sat in silence while she processed the information. Outside, the city was going about its normal Monday morning routine, but inside my apartment, my daughter was discovering that her entire marriage had been built on lies. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "About the money." I waited. "Louis has been pressuring me for months to find out about your will. He said we needed to plan for the future, that we needed to know what kind of care you might need as you got older." He laughed bitterly. I thought he was being responsible. When did the questions start? "Right after we bought the house. He said we'd overextended ourselves and needed to know if you'd be able to help us if we got in trouble." She paused. "That's when he started talking about power of attorney. He said it would be easier for everyone if we could handle your affairs when you got too old to manage them yourself." The timeline made sense. Louis had trapped them with debt, then positioned himself as the solution to their financial problems. My money had been his end game from the beginning. "I'm going to ask you something difficult," I said, "and I need you to think carefully before you answer." She nodded. "If I hadn't had money, if I really had been just a struggling retiree with nothing to leave you, how do you think Louis would have treated me?" The question hit her like a physical blow. I watched her face as she considered it, as she remembered all the times Louis had complained about visiting me, all the suggestions that I should be in a nursing home, all the casual cruelty disguised as concern. "He would have pushed me to cut you off completely," she whispered, "because I would have been a burden with no benefit." She covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, what have I done?" I got up and moved to the couch, patting the cushion beside me. After a moment, she joined me, curling up against my side like she used to do when she was scared. "You made mistakes," I said, stroking her hair, "but you also made a choice last night. You chose truth over lies, family over manipulation. What if it's too late? What if I've destroyed everything?" I thought about the conditions in my will, about the requirements for reconciliation and accountability. They weren't punishments. They were a roadmap back to each other. "It's never too late to choose differently," I said. "But it has to be a real choice, not because of money or inheritance, but because you want your father back in your life." She lifted her head to look at me. "I do want that. I want my dad back." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in 2 years. "Then we'll figure out how to make that happen." Outside, snow had started to fall, covering the city in a blanket of white. Inside, my daughter and I began the slow work of rebuilding trust. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of Willowbrook Senior Living Community, watching as movers carried the last of my furniture into my new apartment. It wasn't what Lewis had envisioned when he'd suggested I move to a retirement home. This place was more like a luxury resort that happened to cater to people over 65. The community sat on 23 acres of landscaped grounds, with a golf course, tennis courts, swimming pools, and a dining room that rivaled the best restaurants in the city. My 2-bedroom apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden where residents grew vegetables and flowers. The monthly fee was $3,800, a fraction of what my investments generated each month. I'd chosen this place not because I needed care, but because I wanted community, real community, with people who valued conversation, shared experiences, and mutual respect. It was everything my daughter's house had never been. "Dad?" I turned to find Milena standing in the doorway, holding a box marked "Kitchen" in her careful handwriting. She'd been helping with the move all day, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her 34 years. "Where do you want this?" she asked. "Kitchen counter is fine," I said, making room for her to pass. "That should be the last of it." She set the box down and looked around the apartment. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the hardwood floors and granite countertops. My furniture looked comfortable and welcoming in the spacious rooms. "It's beautiful," she said. "Really beautiful." "It's home," I replied, and meant it. The past 6 months had been a journey for both of us. Milena had filed for divorce immediately after Christmas, citing irreconcilable differences and abuse. Lewis had fought it initially, demanding half of everything, until the criminal charges for fraud and forgery made him more amenable to a quick settlement. He'd moved to another state with Rebecca, leaving behind a trail of debt and damaged relationships. Milena had lost the house, of course. The mortgage was underwater, and without Lewis's income, she couldn't afford the payments anyway. But she'd found a small apartment near downtown, within walking distance of the coffee shop where she'd gotten a job. It was a humbling experience for someone who'd grown accustomed to luxury, but I watched her discover strengths she didn't know she had. "How are the counseling sessions going?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair. She sat on the couch across from me, the same position we'd taken that morning in my old apartment when she'd first begun to see clearly. "Hard," she said honestly. "Dr. Martinez doesn't let me get away with anything. She makes me examine every choice I made every time I chose Lewis over you." The family counseling had been her idea, not a requirement from my will. She'd started individual therapy first, then asked if I'd be willing to join her for joint sessions. It was painful work, digging through years of manipulation and damaged trust, but it was necessary. "What did you talk about this week?" "Boundaries," she said. "How I lost mine, how to rebuild them, how to recognize manipulation before it takes root." I nodded. Dr. Martinez was excellent. I'd researched her carefully before agreeing to the sessions. "She asked me something yesterday that I can't stop thinking about," Milena continued. "What's that?" "She asked what I would say to 18-year-old me if I could go back and warn her about Lewis." I waited, sensing this was important. "I couldn't answer her," Milena said, her voice quiet. "Because 18-year-old me was so angry with you after Mom died. I blamed you for not saving her, for letting the cancer win, for being sad all the time afterward." The words hung in the air. We'd never talked about this directly, about how my grief had affected her grieving. "I was drowning in my own sorrow," I said. "I didn't know how to help you process yours. I know that now. But back then, I was looking for someone to blame, someone to be angry with. Lewis gave me permission to stay angry with you." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Dr. Martinez said that Lewis probably saw that anger and knew how to use it. He made me feel like choosing him over you was justified because you'd failed me somehow. The insight was painful, but necessary. And now? Now I know the difference between grief and failure. You weren't perfect after Mom died, but you were present. You kept working, kept our home together, kept loving me even when I pushed you away. I felt tears prick my eyes. I should have gotten us both into counseling back then. Maybe, she said, but we can't change the past. We can only choose what to do with the future. A knock on the door interrupted our conversation. Through the window, I could see a woman in her 70s holding a casserole dish. That'll be Margaret from next door, I said, getting up. She's been threatening to bring food all week. Margaret Chen was exactly the kind of neighbor I'd hoped to find here. A retired librarian, she was sharp, funny, and refreshingly direct. She'd moved to Willowbrook after her husband died, not because she needed help, but because she wanted purpose. I brought lasagna, she announced, bustling past me with the authority of someone accustomed to feeding people. And I want to meet this daughter I've been hearing about. I made introductions, watching as Margaret subjected Milena to the kind of polite but thorough questioning that librarians specialize in. Where did she work? What did she like to read? Did she play cards? We have a bridge group, Margaret informed her. Your father mentioned you might be interested in learning. Milena glanced at me in surprise. You want to teach me bridge? I want to share things I enjoy with you, I said, if you're interested. It was a small thing, but it represented something larger. For years, our relationship had been about obligation, guilt, and manipulation. Now we were discovering what it could be when built on genuine affection and shared interests. Margaret left us with detailed instructions for heating the lasagna and an invitation to dinner the following Sunday. I'm having the whole bridge group over, she said. 7 people, all of them curious about Tobias's mysterious family. After she left, Milena helped me put away the last of my kitchen items. We worked in comfortable silence, finding rhythms that felt natural. Dad, she said eventually, I need to tell you something. I paused, a coffee mug halfway to the cabinet. I met with James Mitchell yesterday about the will. The conditions I'd set were clear. Divorce Lewis, complete counseling, acknowledge publicly what had happened. She'd done the first 2. The third remained. I want to write a letter, she said, to the local newspaper about elder abuse, about how easy it is to miss the signs, especially when the abuser is family. I set the mug down carefully. That's a big step. I've been thinking about Lewis's other victims, his ex-wives' families, the people who didn't have your resources, your intelligence, your ability to fight back. She turned to face me fully. Someone needs to speak up about what happened. It might as well be me. The decision was hers to make, and I could see she'd thought it through carefully. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of scrutiny? She nodded. Dr. Martinez says that taking responsibility publicly is often the final step in healing from manipulation. Not because shame heals anything, but because truth does. I smiled, feeling proud of the woman my daughter was becoming. Then I support whatever you decide. We finished unpacking as the sun set over the gardens outside my window. When it was time for her to leave, Milena hugged me at the door, a real hug that lasted longer than politeness required. I love you, Dad, she said. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember how to show it. I love you too, sweetheart. I never stopped. After she left, I stood on my balcony, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow, Margaret would introduce me to the rest of the bridge group. Next week, I was starting a woodworking class in the community workshop. Next month, Milena and I were planning a trip to visit my sister in Florida, our first vacation together in over a decade. Lewis had been wrong about many things, but especially about this. Age hadn't made me powerless. It had made me selective about where I spent my power and with whom I shared my life. In the distance, I could hear laughter from the community center, where residents were gathering for movie night. My phone buzzed with a text from Milena. Thank you for not giving up on us. I smiled, typing back, never. Then I went inside to heat up Margaret's lasagna and begin the next chapter of my life.